Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for coming this afternoon. My name is Jin Young-jin. I'm the Director of Culture Program here at the Wang Center. And it's my great pleasure to welcome you all to this special lecture, Listening to Bamboo, and joining us to celebrate the renown and beauty and exquisite craftsmanship of Japanese bamboo basket. Rob Coffland, today's guest lecturer, is one of the world leading expert on Japanese bamboo. He's the author of many books, Contemporary Japanese Bamboo Arts and the Bamboo Basket Arts of Higashi Takasonsai, and Hin, The Quiet Beauty of Japanese Bamboo Arts. And he's also contributor to numerous other books and publications on the subject. So Coffland founded TAI Gallery, which showcases contemporary Japanese art to the American public and provide the exquisite works in our current exhibition. So we hope that this exhibition serves as a fitting tribute to the talent and dedication of all the artists whose work is on display, including the late Katsushiro Soho, who recently passed away last month. So may their artistry and skill continue to be admired and appreciated for years to come. So we hope that you will find this lecture to be more informative and engaging, and it will deepen your appreciation for the extraordinary creativity on display. So without further ado, let me invite Rob Coffland.
Thank you very much. This is the first time to have a monitor down over here, so I'm going to be looking this way and looking out to you. So the first image on this in the presentation is a sculpture that was realized by Tanabe Shokosai IV at the San Francisco Asian Art Museum. And these site-specific sculptures could have up to 10,000 pieces of strips of bamboo interlaced, and then at the end of it, it's taken down and used for another installation. I stand corrected. Actually, this was at Japan House in Los Angeles. Bamboo is a very ubiquitous plant that's throughout almost all of Japan. There's tiny bamboo grasses that are in this far north where it's colder, but it's also something that we associate with Japan. And this is a beautiful path in Kyoto with a bamboo fence at the base. And bamboo has played a long role in Japanese cultures going back to millenniums. And in this case, it's being used for conducting water from one point to another. And then it's also used in house interiors, in this case in the rafters, small bamboo along with other larger pieces. But at the heart of this art form are baskets, utilitarian baskets, which you see throughout East Asia and Southeast Asia and into India and other parts of the southern South Asia. And it's foundational there for just day-to-day use. But out of that, during the Edo period, when Japan was closed to outsiders and everything was very regulated, flowers baskets came in from China. And they were so popular that artists were asked to make copies. And this eventually led to, after the Meiji Restoration, the first artist to sign his work and say, this is original, this is something Japanese, Hayakawa Shokosai I. And he worked in different types, more rustic bamboo, and he was actually taught by a man by the name of Waiichisai, who was a teacher who worked with bamboo that came out of the rafters of old farmhouses. And this is actually bamboo that would have been carbonized over, could be 100 to 300 years. and the artists started using that, and it led to people starting to think about using different materials. The artist who did the site-specific sculpture, this is his great-grandfather, Shokosai I, and he made highly ornate pieces, and they would sell for $400,000 or $500,000 at the time in Japan. They were that revered and esteemed. And other artists, this is Maeda Shokosai I, who used bamboo roots. So there started to be an exploration of using different materials in the art making that was going on, because these people dealt with mainly the imperial family or the extended parts, or very, very wealthy people. And so there was a lot of competition. Moving on into the 1920s and 30s, pre-war Japan, an artist emerged out of family, Izuka Shonsai, who started just using the bamboo in a more natural state after it's been cut and processed in this ivory color, in a more relaxed style of plating. And eventually he even moved into doing something like this hanging basket, which was basically a flattened piece of bamboo and then carefully molded, probably using a low temperature, into this envelope-like fold, and then tied off with another type of bamboo, which creates this wonderful drama of the possibility you could snip it and it would open up, or pull the knot out. And so a lot of changes were happening at this point. And another important artist started working in the pre-war period, Shono Shonsai, who started using what's called line construction, where strips are basically aligned and then tied off. And so you get this wonderful kind of being able to see through the basket, and it gives a certain lightness to it. After the war, Shonsai made a dramatic shift into actually making things that were no possibility of functionality. And this was very, very radical event in the world of bamboo art. He wanted to do something new and different, but yet he's also still drawing upon a simple hexagonal plate, but he stacked it up. So you get this incredible openness. And also he made the step where he incorporated down at the bottom, these are metal legs. This is a piece that's in the San Francisco Asian Art Museum. And he did not produce a great many pieces, so it was extremely exciting when I managed to find for a collector this piece. And I didn't even notice the metal at the first time I saw it. But you start to see some moire patterns coming out in this. And then Shono Shonsai took yet another leap in the early 1950s into something that was purely sculptural, and this is called Doto. And this was extremely well received in the world of Japanese art at that time. And this is fairly large, and it's just these beautiful, clean sweeps of bamboo that just, you can feel the motion in it. And also, again, the moires activate the sculpture just that much more. Eventually, Shono Shonsai was invited to become the first living national treasure in bamboo arts. But in order for him to become part of this world, he had to go backwards and make functional objects. This was something that he was perfectly at home. And this is a type of baskets called shosen. And because he had this foundation of working, he could make that shift. And so after that, he died at a fairly young age, and his son, Tokuzo, became a an artist who worked, again, with the sweeps of bamboo and bringing a kind of flowing quality, because he had actually studied art at an art school and had wanted to be a glass artist. But his father had a different idea and said, basically, you're coming back and you're going to carry the family name forward. But he adapted. And in this case, you can see these wonderful shadows coming through and this kind of lightness because of just the beauty of the material. Here's another one that shows, again, this kind of flowing outwards, almost like you could feel wind in the bamboo. And the artists are aware of the material that they're working with, and they have a great love of the material. It was extremely difficult for him to follow his father in this field of working with bamboo, but he persevered and became a leading leader within the Japanese Fine Arts Association. Now, Shonsai had a number of students, and most of the students were absolutely in awe of Shonsai just because of his greatness as an artist and the radical break that he made from traditional basketry, per se. And Yamaguchi Ryon chose to continue and kind of adapt working with ideas his master had, including this fluidity that you see in this wave form that's up here, but he's used the hexagonal plate in a whole different way and created this, this wonderful shape, and you could almost feel the movement, and the piece, if you touched it, would actually slightly rock and move within the space. He moved on to doing, again, a wave-like forms or knot-like forms using line construction, which is here where he takes strips of bamboo and then anchors them, and so that you can just see that movement going through the whole sculpture. This is another work, later work of his, which is in the show. And again, this comes up from the base, and then is the bands are interlaced. And so you'll see that there's this wholeness, flowing quality that will become especially apparent as you actually look at the pieces. Another student of Shonsai, whose father had been a bamboo artisan in the countryside, and he learned the basics from his father, and then he went on to have an apprenticeship with Shonsai for a couple of years. And by apprenticeship, I mean that he literally probably just watched the master working and then did tasks around the studio and helped out making very simple things that might have been sold for tea ceremony. After he left his apprenticeship, he really didn't know quite what to do, and he decided that he wanted to just go back and make vessels. And he's worked in that whole vein his whole life, where you look at this and you don't see any of the nodes, or you don't almost sense that this is bamboo, because it's just so finely crafted and has this perfection about it. But it also, when you look at this piece in the show, you'll see that there is a certain liveliness about how it occupies the space, and you could almost want to pick it up to feel the textures that he's created using the plating techniques. This is another piece that also is in the show, and there it has this feeling like it was almost like a soft material that was then kind of pushed in to make this opening in there. And so he just worked with the material, and at times you almost look at this and you think that it might be wood. This is called armor style plating, and it has this strength to it, but yet also you can look through it at the same time. Going into an artist that's also in this area who had a very unique way that he came to this art form. He was a gas station attendant. And in his 30s, he just started feeling like, I want to do something more with my life. And he decided to quit his job and study the basics of bamboo basket making, and then set out to become an artist over a number of years. And he's now considered one of the leading artists within the traditional craft arts world. And he loves the pliancy of the material, and these vertical strips, you can see how the bamboo can be torqued and moved into this flowing composition with a counter movement going the other way with a finer plating inside of those bands. And here again you see the same thing, but he's now contrasting a little bit with colors. And here is a piece that is also made out of this carbonized sooted bamboo that he has taken, and again, basically gently torqued the bamboo and probably using, again, a light heat or something to get it into a shape, and then composing it with the rattan, which is a material that the artists use for finishing and making very fine knots down here and there to complete that. But this is a wonderful, beautiful color that he loves working with. Another artist in this same region in Kyushu is Morigami, and there's an extraordinary piece of his work that I had seen the pictures for the exhibition, and I was expecting a certain size, and it's big. And he mostly made small flower baskets until Thai modern came along and began introducing this work to the Western public, and his whole career shifted at that point, making this. And in this case, he has these vertical strips that come up that you can see, and then he has this wavy pattern that's there that looks like twine, and in fact it's twining of strips of bamboo to make that flowing composition in the body of the basket. And this evolved into other shapes and forms, and they all have this light diaphanous feel to them. And they are literally, that basket would weigh ounces. It's just light. It could almost visually float away, and it exemplifies how bamboo can be used in many different ways. I used to say to this artist, I know you're going to have another great idea. And he certainly did, which is using the hexagonal plate, and it goes back again to what you saw with the Shono Shonsai piece, where the stacked up bamboo. But in this case, by modulating the opening of the hexagonal shapes, he can then basically configure a whole landscape, very topographical landscape, and then just finish it off into this form that you almost feel like it's a twisting, somebody like in dance or in motion. He had has a number of students. This is Kawano, and he likes that openness too, where you can see through and you can feel, again, this lightness of bamboo. And this has the possibilities, as like so many of these things, of actually having flowers. And I believe Eric put flowers in this particular one, if my memory's correct. And the artists, well, they envision their baskets as being something that is seen as a work of art. They are also very pleased when people actually do flowers in these baskets. And some of the baskets are really a challenge, and a lot of people who do ikebana, they just don't want anything to do. It's just too challenging or daunting. Here's another example of a basket that he did, incorporating these really lovely strips of bamboo in two different colors, and again, it has a feeling of solidity and also at the same time lightness. This is a piece where he's working with a smaller diameter bamboo. If you work with a lot of times, because they want it to be look very straight, very clean, like it's almost you can't tell it's bamboo almost immediately. But in this case, he wants you to see the roundness of the bamboo. So this is going to be a smaller diameter of bamboo, and so you can then get that roundness and that just a different feeling. The other student of Morigami was Honda. And Honda, when I met him, he was making traditional baskets, and I started sponsoring his making pieces because the man was so poor that he didn't have the time to make something. So I would just basically say, I'll buy the piece, and then I'll find somebody who's going to add it to their collection. And he kept getting rejected. And finally, it was like the third time that he came and asked me to sponsor him again. I was really skeptical. And he said, I've got this great idea. And I'm a bit of a risk taker. And I said, yes. And this series popped out. And I was just stunned at it. And he just moved into a whole different world of art making. Here he's doing it in a solid form with this knot, which uses a very traditional technique that was used traditionally for making boxes, and he moved it into that. Here he moved it into a two-dimensional wall, to a three-dimensional wall piece, and then he moved into a different direction, and you feel like this could almost walk away. Incredibly talented artist. Kawashima also it lives down in the area of Kyushu, and he was making traditional vessels and just couldn't deal with it. And he started at making site-specific sculptures out of green bamboo around in Japan. Sometimes he'd just do it out in the countryside for his own joy with friends, and other times he would get commissions from city governments to do it. This is a piece that he was commissioned to do for an art center in Saratoga, California, the first piece they did, called Gateway to the Future. Another piece that he realized is at the Kennedy Center in Washington, D.C., that was part of the Festival of Japan. The commissions were not that often, and a collector said, well, I really like what he's doing, but I don't have any room for that. And I said to Kawashima, why don't you make a small version? And going from this large organic forms nearly killed him. I mean, it took him like 3 months to start making small, kind of like maquettes. And he made them with bamboo and tied them with string. And this has become fairly popular for people to buy. And what's interesting is this is a form that he made again, but it made it bigger. But by adding dark knots, it gives a whole different feeling. And there's a more kind of a gravitas to this. Then he moved on to making other things, which this is a favorite piece that he made, which has this very kind of, well, human-like figure that you almost feel like I could move away. And so he's built upon working in this small scale as an artist. So we're moving up from the Kyushu area up into the Tokyo region, and this is the first bamboo artist that I met back in 1997, Katsushiro Soho. When I went out there, the person who interlocked me with him said, well, he's a farmer and he makes baskets. And so I got out there, and after having tea and the conversation, went up to his studio. When he started pulling things out, I was just like totally blown away, because all I knew was really historic baskets at that point. And this is called Early Morning Dawn, and it's about this long, and this is twisted bamboo that was done with heat that comes down and under here, the base of the basket comes back up and is twisted on the other side, so that when you looked at it, you had this like shimmering feeling of landscape, and it just took my breath away. And then it had this beautiful plating on the end, so there was this formality and then this informality at work. And Katsushiro was just at this point where his artistic creativity was really taking off, because early on he made pieces that were very traditional, but they lacked life, and he kind of knew that. And what he decided to do was to look around nature and try to express what he saw as a person who lives in the countryside and who is a farmer. And all of his baskets have, as you'll see going through the exhibition, you'll see the titles have very poetic elements to them. And here he's working with this, again, slightly round bamboo, and the bamboo strips come up, and actually he then, because of the pliability of bamboo, is able to actually make the rim out of the body and the base. This is one of the, the real charms for artists in working with this material. Here's another piece with what is a technique that he helped to revive, smashed bamboo, where he would take a bamboo and he would open it up, and then he would pound it and flatten it out, and then plate it together. A real deep understanding of the material develops with these artists, and then they begin to experiment and try to see how they can use it in new ways. Here's a very finely plated piece of his work. So that's another defining element of many of these artists, is that they can go from formality to informality in terms of their art making. So Katsushiro became a living national treasure. His neighbors had no idea that he was at that level. They just knew that he was actually a basket maker. So it was quite a stir in the community. Here's another piece. This is in the exhibition, which has also this aperture-like opening, like the previous one, which gives it kind of a drum-like feeling, and gives it just this lovely animation. The second living national treasure, Fujinuma Noboru, worked in a camera company for quality control, and in his late 30s he decided to go to France, and Paris was, of course, the first place he went. And he just noticed that the richness of this culture and the traditions in France. I was very struck by that, what he saw. And he came back thinking, I want to do something that's with my hands, and it's very reflective of Japanese culture. And in the process of his exploration, he came across a book by Shono Shonsai, the man who made the first sculptural pieces, and he said, this is the artist. This is the art form for me. And so he set out, went and studied with a local teacher, and then was able to quickly establish himself, making these very finely plated pieces and evolving them into the piece that you'll see here. At the base of this is that previous form, and then eventually he was able to put these strips of bamboo that have been stacked up and basically woven through the body of the basket, coming over to the rim. Those baskets that are the formal ones are made for the fall exhibition. For the spring exhibition, he goes to using this more softer, rounder bamboo where you can feel with it. And this is called Springtide, and he basically is just with the bamboo and enjoying just the organic nature of it, and is not so concerned with anything that has a sense of perfection. And so this gives him energy, whereas the other piece takes tremendous concentration for him as an artist. with the baskets, within people in the traditional art world, there's always a flower tube that goes in it that's been lacquered, and so it makes the possibility of usage real. He always made very beautiful flower tubes, but then a number of years ago, he started taking that into something where he basically made the carving and then up to more, sometimes, 100 layers of lacquer. And so here you can see this is where the node would be. So then he opens this up, and then he just begins preparing the surface and then adding the lacquer, and then he sands the lacquer off. And he's found great joy in doing this, and they are extraordinarily beautiful objects. Again, they could be used for flowers, but as objects, they're fantastic. This is Fujitsuka, who had a degree in design and wanted to work in a design, worked in a design organization, and then he just felt like that was going nowhere for him, and he stumbled onto bamboo art. And this is a piece fairly early in his career, which shows these beautiful moires that you'll often see in some of the pieces here. And they have an understanding, actually, of the moires that are potentially being created when they make the pieces. Here is a more recent work with this, again, this really wonderful ethereal sense of space on the inside of the piece, but yet drawn. And one of the dreams of many bamboo artists is to create a new technique. And how he gets some of this feeling is that this is triangulated bamboo, where he takes and makes a strip square. He dyes it, and then he splits it exactly in half, and then he re-dyes it so two sides have the darker color, one side has a lighter color. And so he's able to, again, create a whole different feeling and do something new and different. Here he's doing it, and this piece is here as a purely sculptural form. And take a close look when you go in, and you'll see that, that two-toned color. And then, because he loves sculpture, he took whole cones of bamboo and then cut them and then assembled them into a sculptural piece that floats in air. And it, again, wonderful, wonderful shadows that are in this piece. One of the changes that I saw since I came into the field, and I felt that it was going to become an important part of the bamboo art world, women artists. And this is Oki, who is also in the Tokyo region, who learned from a senior artist, a living national treasure. His last student, Izuku Shonsai, was the teacher. And so she inherited techniques from her master. And so that eventually evolved into, this is the box that looks very solid, that would have been used potentially for tea ceremony. But when you take it and open it, again, there's all this wonderful diaphanous kind of light going on and playing on the surface. Recently, she started making pieces where she takes the bamboo strips and then very carefully, again, through a low temperature heat, and bends it, and is able to get this rippling feeling in this tray of just movement through. And then by modulating the width of the bamboo, is able to create this just wonderful energetic surface in the piece. Again, because of this deep understanding, this is Suzutaki, the sooted bamboo that comes out of the rafters of old farmhouses. And here she's masterfully bent the strips using heat again and created this beautiful tray. Isoi is another woman artist, and she started out again studying with a local teacher for a few years, and her reason for coming to it is because she liked doing flowers and she liked doing tea ceremony, and so she began by making objects that were geared towards that, and then branched out into things that are more normal, and then eventually she made a wonderful leap into being a very prominent artist by bending the bamboo, and then this all comes around and up all over the basket. So there's just this wonderful feeling of movement in the piece. This is one of the jewels, I think, in the exhibition. Out on the island called Sado, which is off the coast of Niigata, where the Japanese shogunates would send their political enemies to work in the gold mines, where your life expectancy was 2 to 3 months, is an artist, a group of bamboo artists out there. And Hideaki Homa is an artist who actually went to work with his father, who made bamboo brooches as well as making art. And that was a great fad starting in the Olympics in 1964, where people had bamboo brooches. And so he never learned formal plating techniques where you make a basket up. He worked with the materials in preparation and assemblage, and so he came to this thinking in a whole different way, which at first he thought was a real drawback for him. But eventually he emerged making this form of knot where he's dropping in plating, so he never started by making vessels, which sets your mind in a certain direction. And in order to do this, he makes often lots of drawings. In this case, he made a small sculpture even, and then an armature out of bamboo, so that then he can shape the bamboo once he's kind of got it in between the plating in between the pieces of this whole bamboo, and then shape it against the armature. And so these are drawings for that former piece, and so there's just all this creative process that goes back beyond just taking a stick of bamboo, cutting it, and all of a sudden doing something with it. And many artists draw. And sometimes it could be on just scraps of paper. And this piece is a wonderful example where he's made a base out of bamboo. So you can see down here, so this rests here, and you can see how this comes around. There's 2 parts to the piece. Here's a piece where he uses the plating techniques but makes this incredibly beautiful knot out of the material. And then recently, this just popped out, which I think is just extraordinary and shows how these artists, many of the artists, always wanting to move in a different direction and do something different. And I just love just the feeling of animation in this, of something moving and unfolding. Tanioka, who is lives south of Tokyo, is an artist whose work is just admired by so many artists, because he will make only maybe 2 pieces a year at this point, and he just spends an insane amount of time in preparation of the material, just as a process that's almost mind-boggling. He works with rounded pieces, and everything, even though it's so precise, it just is filled with life and has this incredible warmth, much like he is as a human being. This piece is in the show, and it just has this great feeling of being torqued, but also at the same time being relaxed in a way that it just effortlessly occupies space. Sadly, there are no pieces from Nagakura, who died 4 or 5 years ago. Everything is in his estate, but he is was an extraordinarily gifted artist who had studied with his grandfather, who is a bamboo artisan, and he struck out in his own way very early on. A prolific draftsman, just drawing. Whenever he had spare time, he'd be drawing. He just worked with the bamboo in ways that were always unexpected. Up here you see this is where he split this open, and then the basket actually starts from there at the top and then goes down, as opposed from bottom up. And that eventually emerged into this series called Woman, and where again he's starting from there and then plating down. And if you turn that on its side, what's interesting is you have what would have been used as fish traps in Japan. So there was a utilitarian basis, and he loved fishing and being by the sea. So he turned it in something entirely different. This is a piece that is indeed a spider web, and he came up with this art in seeing contemporary artists who did spider webs and loved experimenting. So now we're back to Tanabe Takeo Shokosai the Fourth. And this is a piece that was at the San Francisco Asian Art Museum, but also once again at the foundation is traditional vessel making, and basically out of that grows more experimental. In this case, it's very solid sculptural piece. Shokosai the Fourth went to art school, studied sculpture, and sees himself as being a sculptor. What I think is remarkable about him is how he thinks about his art making. This is a recent series where he worked with a computer scientist, and they came up with a three-dimensional design, and then the computer scientist came up with what could be like Lego parts that would then, somebody could assemble essentially an armature out of these parts, and then start assembling the sculpture that could then be essentially made, and then the plastic parts, which were 3D printed, were then removed, and you have the disappearing series. And I love that fact about Shokosai the Fourth is that he collaborates with other people in his art making. Here's another piece from the disappearing series, and it has that wonderful feeling of movement. It could move away. So one of the things that I felt about this art form, and Nagakura, who died in 2018, I think really exemplifies how these people feel about when they discover bamboo as their own medium for their artistic expression. And I hope as you look at the show that you will see the sculptural aspects of the work and see that it's something that can be explored on many levels and has a great future in the art world. So, thank you. I went 5 minutes over. I apologize.
Oh, that's okay. Any questions?
Thank you so much for an absolutely fascinating talk. And I was just wondering what your own background, what brought you into this field, and how did you become involved with Japanese artists?
Yes. I went to Japan the first time with my late wife in 1983. And my major in college had been speech communication. And the way Japanese communication works or how people interact is just so different from how we interact here in the States. And so I was fascinated with it right to the beginning. And I went many times there. And at that time, I was in a whole different business. I was also blessed to have in my late wife, Mary Hunt Collenberg, an incredible teacher. And she had a gallery, textile arts. She had had a background as a curator at the LA County Museum of Art. Had studied art history, and I had never had an art class in my life. And I just became more and more drawn to art, and I started reading, and I started visiting museums. Mary handled a lot of different kinds of textiles, so I learned all about antique and historic and ethnographic textiles, and I just began to be drawn more into the world of art. And then I sold out of my last business partnership because I was just bored with what I was doing in the middle 90s, and started helping my wife with her gallery. And a patron of hers, Lloyd Coatzen, who owned Neutrogena, found out that I was going to Japan more to sell textiles to museums and private collectors, and he said, "Would you look for baskets for me?" And I knew that Lloyd collected these, and it turns out he had nearly 600 baskets at that time. And I thought, what am I going to find? So I found some historic pieces for him to add to the collection. And a friend who was an artist in Tokyo said, well, you need to go out and meet this basket maker who's a farmer. And that was Katsushiro, the piece with the twisted bamboo. And I was just knocked over by what I saw. And part of what I think what drew me to this area is that as I learned about art, I became fascinated by how few sculptors really moved me. And why was that? What made a sculpture successful? What made it not so successful? Usage of materials. And so I really developed an eye for that. So when I came to this, I looked at it, first and foremost, does it have sculptural qualities? How does it occupy space? How is the material used? Does it have a feeling of life to it? I mean, we know with like Michelangelo, say, with many of his sculptures, I mean, you can just feel something. There's a passion. And you'll see this when you go around. So I was just really blessed with an odd set of circumstances in life that brought me to this destiny of working with these incredible artists.
Yes, thank you for that wonderful talk. I'm interested in the relationship between art and craft. In the brochure, it suggested there were only 100 bamboo artists in Japan. I'm not sure what that means exactly, because I'm wondering how many basket makers, though, that there are. Aren't baskets still something that people use, utilitarian bamboo, throughout the country? So I'm interested in what you would think that how the Japanese relate the arts and the crafts. Do they see them as different, or are they the same?
Okay, fairly complex question. There used to be literally tens of thousands of artisans who worked with baskets, repaired baskets. Sometimes it was something that was just done in the wintertime by people who had time, where they would cut bamboo and they'd make baskets. Katsushiro, the first artist I met, actually had spent one time making cabbage baskets out of bamboo for shipping cabbages into Tokyo. That really no longer exists. With the modernization of Japan, and especially after the war when plastics were developed, and also when there started to be more international trade, where you could have cheap baskets coming in to Japan, eventually meant that people were really not able to make a living doing this sort of thing. They couldn't compete. nor did a lot of them really want to compete with that. It was just not possible. So there was a whole change. And then the other thing is that flower arranging and tea ceremony used to be something mandatory for young women, that they should learn these things to be, I don't know, a proper person in society. And so that started, people didn't have to do that anymore. So the whole relationship to a lot of this changed in time, and sometimes for the good, sometimes not for such a good thing, but it began to change. And so this became a very marginalized art form. So the Japanese really don't see this quite the same way we as Westerners see it, or might see it. Because they see a basket and they think, oh, that is what you use to do flowers, and therefore we can't just have that out. We need to have flowers in it, or else it's not a flower basket. Whereas we tend to see something as a beautiful object. Whether you want to call it a craft at that point, or you want to call it an art, is a very personal choice, and there's no sin in it having that incredibly beautiful crafting. But then it can be seen in a whole different way. I think like Jeff Koons kind of gets the idea of crafting, because I'm sure you've seen some of Koons' sculptures, and he has people who do it, but they're just exquisitely done. Or even Donald Judd. I mean, they're exquisitely crafted objects, sculptures. And so this can be, I would say, please try to look at that in that way, in light of maybe what you see, that where how can I put it? Where basically the accumulation of the beauty is so great that the crafting melts away. Does that make any sense? In other words, you don't notice just how beautifully a Judd is, so perfect. That you don't even think about that. And with many of these pieces, especially ones that don't have any usage possibility, it really is a new sculptural material. And it has a foundation of craft. But painting has a foundation of craft too, when you really start thinking about it. But people, began to take it to a whole nother level, obviously. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you so
Thank
much
you for
for
listening.
coming, and hopefully everyone joined the reception.